You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Cybersecurity issues tend to be nonpartisan. And so we were able to work across the aisle with our counterparts in Congress and, really educate them on the work that we were doing and the places we saw needed some legislative support and legislative intervention or needed budget and resources. Not all of those things move forward or have not moved forward yet, but the conversation and the lines of communication were always open and collaborative.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me, as always, is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben discusses a new lawsuit in Illinois challenging automatic license plate readers. I've got the story of a proposed AI hotline between the U.S. and China. And later in the show, my conversation with Camille Stewart Gloucester, former Deputy National Cyber Director at the White House. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. Identity is the new battleground, and attackers are exploiting stolen identities to infiltrate your organization. Traditional defenses can't keep up. SpyCloud's holistic identity threat protection helps security teams uncover and automatically remediate hidden exposures across your users, from breaches, malware, and phishing to neutralize identity-based threats like account takeover, fraud, and ransomware. Don't let invisible threats compromise your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what attackers already know. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. All right, Ben, let's jump right into our stories here. Why don't you lead things off for us?
So my story comes from the Chicago Sun-Times and comes from the great state of Illinois. There is a new lawsuit brought by plaintiffs in Cook County, which is the county seat of the city of Chicago. Their names are Stephanie Shull and Frank Bednarz. And they are suing the state of Illinois. They've named a bunch of different officials, including the governor, J.B. Pritzker, for abusing automatic license plate readers. This stems from a couple of laws that have been passed over the preceding 5 years or so, increasing the use of these automatic license plate readers, particularly in the Chicago area. There was a law that passed in 2019, the Tamara Clayton Expressway Camera Act, which was named after somebody who was killed, and I believe they weren't able to track down the car that ran her over. And that added basically a ton of automatic license plate readers in the Chicago area. There was a contract given out, or grant money given out to the county, more than $12 million, to expand a vast network of high-definition surveillance cameras since there had been this surge of expressway shootings. That law was expanded in 2021 beyond just Cook County, so it percolated into other areas of Chicago, and it further increased the number of automatic license plate readers across the state. So these plaintiffs are challenging, saying that this violates their Fourth Amendment rights, and this brings up really interesting issues about reasonable expectation of privacy in the digital age post-Carpenter that I think are really unresolved, and therefore, to me, very interesting.
Okay.
So normally you would say you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy when you're on the road because you are in public. Law enforcement has long been able to track people when they're on public thoroughfares. Right. And that's been an acceptable warrantless search because somebody is willingly exposing themselves to the public.
And you're required to have a license plate on your car.
You are required to have a license plate, although many people in the area we live in, Dave, do that very annoying thing where they shade out their license plate so that I believe it's technically illegal.
It is, yes.
So that it cannot be read by the ALPR.
Yes.
Don't do that. It's robbing our local governments of revenue.
There you go.
So these plaintiffs are complaining that this is a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. Like I said, you would think that you would not have reasonable expectation of privacy. I think that applies to a small set of license plate readers. If they weren't everywhere, if they were just in high traffic locations, then you might be able to say that this is clearly a Fourth Amendment violation. People should not expect that there are license plate cameras everywhere following them around. Therefore, it's not a Fourth Amendment search. Therefore, a warrant is not required. But like in Carpenter, we have a situation where because the network of cameras is so big, it does end up tracking the whole of a person's movement. So what's at least alleged in this lawsuit is that you could do long-term tracking of a person. It's held in a Motorola database for, I believe, 90 days, and that can be extended at any time. You could figure out where a single person has been, the therapist they go to, the religious institutions, their extramarital affairs, all through simply warrantlessly obtaining license plate data from this database. And the analogy is to Carpenter, where the Supreme Court held that historical cell site location information was also a recitation of a whole of a person's movements. So it was tracking them, in that case, over a series of 7 days, I believe, and knew the defendant's location at all times because his cell phone was pinging a local tower. I guess the question is, in this case and all cases where defense attorneys or the plaintiffs in this case are trying to analogize the facts at hand to Carpenter, where do you cross that Rubicon? At what point does this become a search? At what point is the network of license plate readers so ubiquitous that it really does actually capture the whole of a person's movement? The case law is completely unresolved on this. We've had some license plate reader cases. We've talked about a couple of them on this podcast, but none of them directly address this question, this threshold question of how many readers would it take where you cannot escape this real-time whole of movements collection that is existing here. And that's why I'm really interested in where this case ends up, because we finally have, I think, a very relevant set of facts here. The relevant set of facts is, without any individualized suspicion, there is a vast network covering all expressways in the Chicago area tracking the movement of various vehicles. And so my instinct would be that that might trigger the type of Fourth Amendment protection you get in Carpenter. There are some differences, however, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this, but I'd also like to kind of dive into what those differences are.
Well, so clarify for me here. So lots of information is being collected. Is that information accessible to law enforcement without a warrant?
Yes.
Okay.
It's stored in a database. Law enforcement can and has obtained data from that database without having to obtain a warrant.
Okay.
This is warrantless collection. As I said, it's kept as a matter of course for 90 days, but you can ask them to maintain data on particular license plates, and they have not said no.
See, I guess where I'm maybe trying to split hairs here is, I guess I don't have so much of trouble with the collection as long as there's a warrant for review.
Right. I mean, the issue here is the warrantless nature of the collection.
Right.
And as it is in all these cases. Now, it was the case in Carpenter. That was warrantless, and that's why that was a live issue.
Yeah.
Obviously, it would be great if law enforcement were able to obtain a warrant. Then we wouldn't have to worry about warrantless collection. Law enforcement would say, we have a lot of criminal suspects in Chicago. We don't always have probable cause to obtain a warrant. So this is an easy way to figure out if a particular car was in a particular location at a particular time without having to go through the cumbersome warrant process. Now, I know law enforcement agencies always say it's really hard to obtain a warrant. I think sometimes they are correct, and sometimes those allegations are a little bit exaggerated. But at least that's the justification you would hear from law enforcement.
Interesting. What is the harm that these folks are claiming?
Just that it violates their reasonable expectation of privacy. I mean, it's the standard harm you'd claim for any Fourth Amendment violation, you can establish standing if you can establish that your Fourth Amendment or any constitutional rights have been violated, even if the harm isn't necessarily concrete. So what they're asking for is an injunction to enjoin the operation of this database and to prevent the Illinois state government from adding to this network of automatic license plate readers. There are a couple of reasons why I think this is different from Carpenter, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay.
One is that it is limited to when you're in your car. So I always have my cell phone on me, whether I'm walking, whether I'm taking public transportation, whether I'm driving. When we're talking about license plate readers, even if the network is extensive, it only applies when you're driving.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Cook County take public transportation. So it's not as all-encompassing to me as it would be with the use of the cell phone. The other thing is that the Fourth Amendment and all Fourth Amendment jurisprudence has this emphasis on people's privacy within their own homes. With cell site location information, you at least can know whether somebody is in their own house at a particular time, which I think is somewhat relevant. You wouldn't necessarily know that with an automatic license plate readers. My understanding is these aren't put on random cul-de-sacs in, Joliet in Chicago or whatever suburb, the North Shore, whatever suburb you can think of in Chicago. I think it's on major thoroughfares, which, yes, to drive, you're going to really get anywhere in the Chicago area, you're going to have to traverse these thoroughfares. But to the extent that it's not all-encompassing, I think you could make it through a day or a weekend without sharing the whole of your movements in a way that you couldn't do if we were talking about historical cell site location information.
So a couple things come to mind here. First of all, you made me think of the kind of issue with red light cameras.
Right.
Where if I'm driving along in my car and I run a red light, and a police officer sees me do that, and the police officer pulls me over, that's a moving violation. But if I'm driving along in my car and I run through a red light and a camera sees me do it, that's a ticket.
Right.
So it just depends on... And the reason is that a ticket you can apply to the vehicle, a moving violation you must apply to the driver. So the notion is that the automation has no way of proving who's actually driving the car. So we will ticket the vehicle, not the driver.
And I think that's the justification here. But here we're talking about potential criminal investigations. And if you're in the preliminary stages of an investigation, it's certainly compelling that that car was on the road. It might not be per se evidence that the individual was there, but, that's Dave's registered vehicle. Dave's registered vehicle was at the site of this crime. What a good, convenient place to start our investigation, right?
Yeah.
So, it might protect you in a limited sense. There is that kind of plausible deniability. But they could use that to obtain further evidence. Okay, well, we have evidence that Dave's car, his license plate reader was read at this particular toll booth or this particular intersection.
Right.
All right, well, now maybe we have probable cause to obtain his cell phone data. So we can get a warrant, go to the cell phone company, and see if he himself was actually there. Yeah. That's kind of the fear you would have here.
Right, and again, it's the ubiquity of the automation, because if some guy's standing by the side of the road and he says, "Hey, there was a red Buick drove by," and they say, "Who drives a red Buick?" "Oh, that's Dave." Right.
Yeah.
So that's different than. It's the scale at which this is happening that makes it problematic. Same with Carpenter, right?
Yeah, I think that's the argument here, is it's the scale. I still go back to this line drawing problem, though. At what point was there a single installation that tipped it over from, well, this network isn't very big, there are a lot of ways to avoid it, to now this triggers Fourth Amendment protection because you can't get anywhere without having your vehicle tracked by this automatic license plate reader system. And if there isn't a proper place to draw the line, it's really hard to make this justiciable. Congress wants to find the courts want to find rules that are consistent, that are easy for people to comply with, and that are easy for lower courts to adjudicate. So they don't want kind of a wishy-washy test. They would like to have some type of bright line rule. And I'm just, I'm kind of racking my brain to figure out what that bright line rule would be. At what point does the fact that this network is so large become decisive in a case at rendering Fourth Amendment protection? I don't know where you draw that line.
So here's another element that I think about with this, and that is data brokers.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things. I was at my local mall recently, which for our listeners who live near us, that's the mall in Columbia. And I'm there, minding my own business, doing my shopping, doing my thing. And I see the mall security vehicle drive by, which is great. Nice to see they're out there patrolling the lots and keeping things safe. But I also noticed on the mall patrol vehicle is license plate readers.
Mm.
And this leaves me scratching my head because I'm going, well, okay, the mall has free parking. Why do they need to be reading license plates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think of, all right, let me give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, what's the good reasons that they could be reading license plate? It could be that they have a policy for mall employees where they want them to park in the farther away parking spaces than the customers. So This is a way to enforce that. Okay, that's possible. The less charitable interpretation would be that I know in some of the reporting I've done for this show and over on the Cyberwire that there are data brokers who will pay people for their license plate reader information. So
it's very valuable, isn't it?
Right. So what I wonder is, and this is totally hypothetical on my part, but I think it's plausible that the data broker says to mall security, hey, good news. We're going to provide you with a free license plate reader for your mall security vehicle, right? You get the benefit of being able to keep track of who's in your parking lot, and if you have problems with folks, you can look for patterns and so on and so forth. In exchange, we get all this data as well. Everybody wins, right?
A win-win-win situation.
Yeah. Now, the other part that this makes me think of is that reading license plates has become table stakes for run-of-the-mill security cameras these days.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly industrial-level security cameras. So if you've got a security camera for your small business and you are checking through the list of possible options you can buy from your security cloud service provider, license plate reading is one of the things that's readily available. And again, people want to buy that data from you.
Mm-hmm.
So your notion that people aren't using this, for coming in and out of your neighborhood, I'm not so sure how true that is anymore, because I have seen stories about condo associations keeping track of who's allowed to park in their neighborhood, who's authorized to park in their neighborhood. And one of the ways they can do it is by using license plate readers. They're cheap and they're easy.
So I guess the difference is the license plate reader system set up in Cook County is set up by the state of Illinois. So It's the government. They know where this data lies. They have direct access to it.
Right.
It's not as cumbersome as having to go to a bunch of different houses and say, hey, can we obtain your security footage? Even if they ultimately would be able to obtain it, I think for Fourth Amendment purposes, it's more of a burden on the government than we set up this vast network where we can figure out where your car was at any time in any particular time period.
Right.
So I do think that is a distinction here. Again, I don't think that gives us any clarity as to precisely where the line is. And that's my criticism of Carpenter as a case. I mean, Carpenter didn't draw a line as it related directly to the collection of historical cell site location information.
Mm-hmm.
They said, what we have here is around 7 days worth of it, and that does qualify for Fourth Amendment protection. But they didn't say whether 2 days would qualify for Fourth Amendment protection or 6 days for that matter. So we just have that real lack of clarity. It's been a problem at the lower court level. And some enterprising legal scholar, hopefully, maybe it'll be me, Dave, should write a compelling law review article on how to draw a bright line rule here to just make cases like this a little bit more justiciable.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity for some line drawing. We're at the preliminary stages of this case. It was just filed. So far, there's been no comment from any of the named defendants. But we'll see how this proceeds through the Illinois, or through the federal courts, rather. This is a federal case. Since they are challenging a federal constitutional provision, they do have a ticket into federal court.
What do you think their chances are of this getting any traction?
It's so hard to know. I mean, there has never been a case like this. The previous cases we've had with automatic license plate readers have just been for much smaller scale violations. And so they haven't had to decide the kind of macro question here about what happens when you have explicitly a vast network. In other cases, it was like there are a lot of automatic license plate readers. Here, it's like, okay, we have this purposeful program to make license plate readers ubiquitous on public thoroughfares. So I usually don't like to say this. I like to at least make some sort of prediction, but I am completely in the dark here on how this federal court is going to rule. So maybe that'll up the suspense a little bit.
Yeah. By the way, the license plate, the software that reads license plates can also tell the make and model of your car.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I can be, they can embarrass me for the outdated make and model of at least one of my cars, which is no longer in production.
Right. Your cinnamon brown 1982 Yugo will get tagged instantaneously.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they'll laugh at you behind the desk. They're at Motorola headquarters.
Right. Exactly. All right. Interesting stuff. That's another one to keep an eye on, huh?
Absolutely. I feel like we're following so many cases. We really should make a database somewhere so that, maybe we can actually do this.
We just need a big pinboard with red thread and, connecting the dots and our little chart.
like we're investigators, and this is The Wire or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my story this week comes from the folks over at Lawfare, and this is about the need for the U.S. and China to have an AI incidents hotline. Evidently, there was an AI safety summit in Seoul a couple weeks ago, and the U.S. and China recently met in Geneva to discuss AI safety. In fact, President Biden and President Xi from China have discussed this. What's interesting is how much this parallels the old days of the Cold War. This article talks about how back in the Cold War, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's really what prompted this idea of a red phone, between Washington, D.C. and Moscow.
Right. Let's prevent this mutually assured destruction. Let's stay on the line to make sure, we control the world's nuclear arsenal. Here it's, we control the world's largest networks and software and computer systems.
Yeah.
So let's work together to make sure this doesn't go to hell. We can resume our rivalry right after our phone call is over. We can still be geopolitical rivals. We can hate each other. We can demagogue one another to the public. But, let's keep that line of dialogue open.
Yeah, I mean, they talked about how during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they talked to one of the former ambassadors, I believe, or someone who worked in the embassy anyway, at the Soviet embassy, and they were saying that, their communications went with runners to Western Union. So they said if they had to get a message quickly back to Moscow, they hoped that the runner didn't stop to talk to an attractive person on the way to slow it down. That was the speed at which information was traveling, and so that's when they decided to put in these direct telephone links, these hotlines between the two nations. And what they're saying is now that AI presents a similar sort of peril, where because of AI, especially if you have military systems hosed up to AI, that things can spin out of control very quickly. And
they talk about some of the catastrophic risks here, including battlefield singularity and hyperwar. Do you know what hyperwar is?
Go on.
No, I don't. I was literally wondering if you knew what that was.
So I think battlefield singularity and hyperwar are they're describing the same thing. I think the Chinese use the term battlefield singularity and we use the term hyperwar. Thanks, because we like to brand everything.
Right. Good old-fashioned American branding.
Yeah, but it's basically just it's things operating with a velocity beyond the human rate. So it's sort of it's like the Terminator, right?
Right.
It's the system takes over and decides to launch, and that it decides that the safest thing to do is to take the humans out of the equation because they're too slow, and it's all those kind of sci-fi sorts of things that we're trying to avoid here. So it sounds like a simple thing, and I guess you would think that this already exists. And I suppose to a certain degree it does. In today's modern world, you have to have these lines of communication. But to actually formalize it and to put protocols in place, diplomatic protocols in place for AI eventualities, and to think about this ahead of time, to have folks thinking about the possibilities of what could happen, it seems pretty smart to me.
I think so too. What I worry about is when we get like a major stress test, when there's a diplomatic incident between the two countries that strains our relationship further than it is now. I'm thinking of the worst case scenario. I guess not the worst case scenario, but a bad scenario of an invasion of Taiwan, where we provide military support. And China has the incentive to say, let's cut off this collaboration we have on AI. We don't want to share any of our secrets.
Right.
That I would worry about. But I think the steps being taken now are absolutely correct. It might seem counterintuitive to establish these lines of communications with our geopolitical rival, but I think the historical analog to the Cold War is so apt because this is realpolitik. This is a way to prevent harm. It's maintaining these lines of communication. And you know what? They're giving us pandas back. So they should be rewarded with some collaboration on AI.
We are getting our pandas back.
We had to give our DC pandas to the Chinese government last year.
Right. Oh.
Trips to the DC zoo became much more boring.
Yeah, humiliating to lose our pandas.
And now we're getting them back. So
you'd think we'd be able to get ourselves some black market pandas, but I guess it's harder than you think.
I mean, it's just unfortunate that they are the world's cutest animal. And their natural habitat is only in China, correct?
That is true. They're bumbling little balls of cuteness.
They are. And so there's no way we could just breed pandas and increase the panda population in our own country. It just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So
this article talks about some of the existing crisis communication channels that are publicly known. And it does point out that one of the big problems or challenges with this is that so much of this is classified, right? If the communications happen, chances are you and I will never hear about it. But there's I guess you'd call it a rumored event that happened. They talk about that the Beijing-Washington hotline was established in 1998. And a direct telephone link was added in 2008 for military communications. And legend has it that the direct telephone link was used during the 2020 war scare, when U.S. defense officials, and I'm quoting the article here, when U.S. defense officials learned that the PLA was genuinely worried about a possible October surprise attack. And Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, allegedly told his counterpart that, quote, if we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise.
Well, that's nice of General Milley.
Isn't it?
I gotta say, though, this all does make me feel better. I mean, we've been assured by members of the Biden administration that we have back channels to the Russian government to prevent the worst possible outcomes of that conflict.
Right.
I just think it's the wise thing to do. AI is going to get, as it becomes more widely adopted, the dangers are going to increase. And before it escalates into something kinetic and super dangerous, threatening to civilization, it would be really nice to maintain that dialogue.
Yeah, and I guess also you think about the context of things like deepfakes, to be able to pick up the phone and say, listen, did your leader actually say that, or was that AI?
Totally.
Yeah.
Right, and we've already seen how effective deepfakes are. We had a lot of people in New Hampshire believing that President Biden called them and instructed them not to vote in the primary. What happens if there's a video out there spreading on social media that's popular in China, purportedly to be from Joe Biden saying we're getting ready to attack Beijing.
Right.
We are
fueling
escalating
up the missile silos.
Exactly. We're escalating conflict in the South China Sea. The bombing starts at midnight or whatever.
Right.
I think that's another very important reason to maintain that line of communication. Something I didn't even think about, but the deepfakes is certainly extremely relevant in this context.
Yeah, and like you say, something you don't think about. I guess, to me, part of what makes this article interesting is that you assume that these back channels are here. You hope that they are, certainly at this level when you're talking about the world's great superpowers. And yet, this article points out that those channels still need regular care and feeding.
Right. They need to be used. It's fine if the channels exist, but we have to know that they exist. They have to actually be used when there's some potential harm out there. We have to have an instinct among both countries to go to these channels to prevent conflict.
Yeah.
I think that's how it works right now, but there's no guarantee that that's how it's going to work in the future.
Right.
You can establish these lines of communications, but they're not very good if they're not used.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, we will have a link to that story in the show notes. And again, we would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for our show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Camille Stewart Gloucester. She is former Deputy National Cyber Director at the White House, also one of my favorite people to interview. It's always time well spent when I get to chat with Camille Gloucester. Here's our conversation. Well, let's start off by talking about the journey that you had becoming the Deputy National Cyber Director at the White House. I mean, how did you initially get the call to see if this was something you might be interested in?
So that journey began before the office was even stood up. I had started a mentorship program in collaboration with West Exec during the pandemic. So everyone was locked up at home through an organization I started called Next Gen NatSec. And in organizing it, I also participated and was paired with Chris Inglis. And over the course of about 6 months, we had a number of conversations around cybersecurity and national security in our careers. And it was a very fruitful conversation. But one of the things that we discussed was the need for an Office of the National Cyber Director. He had been a part of the Cyber Solarium Commission, and I had been writing articles about passing this in the NDAA and getting it stood up and the importance of the office. And so we had a number of conversations about what it should look like and why it was important and how essential it was to get the office stood up as soon as possible. And when Chris got nominated to be the first National Cyber Director, I was really excited because I knew from firsthand conversations that he had put a lot of thought and energy into what the office should look like. But I guess he also knew the same about me. And so he approached me to lead a part of the organization focused on future resilience. And he said my background on supply chain security issues and in emerging technology spaces, and then my personal passion for people and empowering people in these spaces and national security spaces and cybersecurity spaces led him to think that I should lead a team focused on future resilience. And the journey started there.
And what was that transition like to go into public service? Was that a bit of a culture shock for you?
No, this is not my first tour of duty, as they say in government. In the Obama administration, I was at the Department of Homeland Security, and I helped stand up the Office of Cyber Infrastructure and Resilience Policy. And so coming back to government felt like coming home in some ways. It was definitely a shift in many others because I was coming from Google. And there's kind of a change of perspective that you have to flip the switch on when you transition between government and the private sector. But I find that I was often thinking about how government could take the ball further than I could in the private sector, and then usually vice versa when I switched roles. And so by the time I was coming back into government and moving into the White House, I was excited about all of the areas where I saw opportunity for the federal government to really lean in and to sit in a seat where I really had the power to drive that kind of change.
And what was the day-to-day like? What sort of problem solving were you actively involved with?
So much. I mean, first was just the standing up of the Office of the National Cyber Director. There was one person and a half on my team when I arrived. And so envisioning what this broad mandate to think about future resilience and emerging technology and cyber workforce, what did that really mean in practice? And who were the experts and thought leaders that should be a part of that team? What would the connectivity to the interagency look like? What structures would we need to set up? So I did a lot of thinking about what was the vision and mission of this part of the organization and how did we realize that affirmative vision that we were starting to build out in the national cybersecurity strategy and eventually instantiated in that. And so a lot of work was there, but also with the day-to-day policy writing, the sitting in deputies committee meetings, making decisions about national security policy as a whole, particularly where it intersects with the issues that I was leading. It was engaging with the private sector. I think one of the hallmarks of the Office of the National Cyber Director is truly collaborating with the private sector, with non-federal entities to get a holistic and complete understanding of the cyber threat landscape and the opportunity landscape. And so a lot of my work was that kind of engagement with our non-federal partners, with our international partners, and then building out action-oriented ways to achieve those goals. How do we not only think through these things, but then deliver on the priorities that we set as a federal government, but also collectively as a nation or as a global society?
How did you and your colleagues there measure success?
So it depended on the initiative. On the cyber workforce side, I think a lot of the initiatives that we had that called upon non-federal entities to commit time, talent, resources, really demonstrated the forward motion. In the cyber workforce space, the federal government only has a small piece of the work. And so every time we got a company or a state government or an academic institution or a training provider to commit to delivering more cyber training, to commit to training up more people or delivering more programs that were relevant, that really demonstrated success. And then on some of these emerging technology issues and supply chain issues, some of the success was coordination. Quite frankly, there are a lot of authorities that can be brought to bear throughout the executive branch. And one entity really looking at not only the national security implications, but the economic implications, the human security implications, and be able to provide that holistic perspective, prioritize, deconflict, that kind of work. Living in ONCD was really an added benefit. And so I think we moved better as a federal government. It was clearer who was doing what. I mean, I think that's obvious in things like the implementation plan from the National Cybersecurity Strategy. We were able to deliver on things like the AIEO, which was a whole of government effort and led at the White House. And I think the fact that security is right at the top really demonstrates how ONCB poured into that process and really helped deliver. So it's obvious in a number of different things. A lot of the collaborative policy efforts you see, implementation of the strategies we delivered, the novel policy conversations that we're having, the exposure of private sector to some information that can help guide how they move. Like we had all of these conversations on things like space cybersecurity and climate and cybersecurity that really kind of infuse cybersecurity as parts of broader conversations that were already ongoing.
Government, certainly Congress is sort of, famously dysfunctional these days. And I'm curious, to what degree were you and your colleagues in your office able to kind of stay above that partisan fray? I mean, it strikes me that cybersecurity is one of the areas that seems to get broad bipartisan support these days.
Yes, that is one of the things that is most encouraging is that cybersecurity issues tend to be nonpartisan. And so we were able to work across the aisle with our counterparts in Congress and, really educate them on the work that we were doing and the places we saw needed some legislative support and legislative intervention or needed budget and resources. Not all of those things move forward or have not moved forward yet, but the conversation and the lines of communication were always open and collaborative. And we also took it upon ourselves to do as much as we could within the executive branch because that's our remit. And Congress has a lot of things to balance day to day. But I don't think there have been any real impediments to having an open dialogue about where we should be going as a nation and some broad alignment on the outcomes we seek. That said, Congress does have quite the agenda to deliver against. And so their prioritization doesn't always look the same as ours in the executive branch.
When you joined the organization, did you have any sort of time range in mind for how long you felt like this was going to be the place for you?
No, I usually let impact drive tenure. And so I was committed to staying as long as the opportunity for impact was great. And I think a lot of work was done to instantiate the Office of the National Cyber Director to deliver on the things that I really came there to do, like work on AI, like work on supply chain security, like work on cyber workforce. And so having achieved those things and feeling like maybe it was time that I could do a little bit more from the outside that I could do from the inside was kind of the catalyst for that decision. But, people usually only last in the White House about 12 to 18 months. So I made it just about 2 years. I'm part of that.
Did you ever have kind of, pinch yourself moments where you looked around and you said to yourself, I'm in the White House?
All the time. I feel like if you don't, then you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
There's so much history and, so much about who we are as a nation, who we are as people has been impacted by the decisions made in those halls and by the people who choose to dedicate their lives to service. And, whether it be the structures like walking through the White House and the executive office building, or it be thinking about the impact of the work that you're doing and the urgency of the things that make it to your table because they are national security imperatives or economic security imperatives. I hope that everybody in these seats to stop to reflect routinely. But yes, it hit me quite often.
Yeah. Where do you suppose that we're headed here? I mean, when it comes to cyber policy, having had that insider's view, I mean, are you optimistic that we're in a good place as a nation in terms of developing good, meaningful, actionable policy?
I think we are pointed in the right direction, but have lots of work to do. And the federal government is a big ship to turn. And so a 2.5 year, almost 3-year-old organization cannot make all the changes that would need to be made in a moment, nor can a series of those, right? CDP is a new organization within state. I think we've identified some of the apparatuses that we need to make effective cyber policy and to make that values aligned and designed to achieve our desired goals. rather than organizing ourselves around combating the threat, right? Like, let that be a feature of achieving the desired goal rather than the way we orient ourselves. So I think we have started to put the structures in place, but there's work to be done to make sure that those are strong and healthy and continue to drive towards actionable policy that really addresses the root issue we seek to fix, or the value we seek to preserve. And I'm excited to see that work continue.
Before I let you go, any words of wisdom for folks who might be considering a career in public service?
Please do it. The federal government, the international and national cyber ecosystem in general will benefit from your experience in the private sector or in civil society. There is a richness of perspective that comes from moving in and out of government, from seeing these issues from all sectors and different industries. So please make your career one that allows you to move from organization to organization and include the federal government in that.
Ben, what do you think?
Really a great get for our podcast. She is on her way out.
Yep.
And it's just great to get that insight as to what the cybersecurity brass is thinking at the White House, especially during these very challenging times. So it's just great to hear her perspective, and big get for our podcast, Dave.
Yeah, she's just an impressive lady, and has really been doing some great work there at the White House, and I wish her well in all her future endeavors. So.
Yes, I think the White House is going to miss her.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Did you know Active Directory is targeted in 9 out of 10 cyber attacks? Once attackers get in, they can take control of your entire network. That's why Sempris created Purple Knight, the free security assessment tool that scans your Active Directory for hundreds of vulnerabilities and shows you how to fix them. Join thousands of IT pros using Purple Knight to stay ahead of threats. Download it now at sempris.com/purple-knight. That's sempris.com/purple-knight. All right, well, that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K Cyberwire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Our executive editor is Brandon Karp. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.